Hey folks, good morning. It's a gorgeous day today. A little cloudy, a little sprinkly, but it could be worse, it could be better. So, I was just talking to a couple of people a few days ago, and we're talking about certain subject matter, something, I like to do, listen to people and find out what's going on in their lives. But a friend of mine said something that really is very profound that sometimes we don't think about is that we over and over always try to pretend that the certain things hasn't has a certain issue that needs to be brought forth. That's part of life. That's part of being a human being. But what really is something you need to contemplate is the avenue of your decisions, the avenue of what you think is this or that, what kind of criteria you need to think about when it comes to certain perspective. It doesn't matter if you have an opinion based on assumption, presumption, or anything like that. But the biggest point needs to be reflected is that often we begin to create these idea what things could be based on what you hear, what you read. But the problem with that is that we've walked away from the certainty of doing our own independent research, just not listening to one side of the story and start looking at every perspective. Now, what I do for a living, no matter what it is, I always put forth the effort, a strong effort for the last 25, 30 years. I always assert when I write a paper that my opinion should be noted, but never noted within my assessment or diagnosis. Every point of reflection I always do when it comes to certain projects is that I have to assert all the data driven by information and evidence that is pointed into those perspectives. What does it mean? I'll give an example. Years ago in the 80s, Walter Cronkite best said something that really reflects certain things. It's it's important to have your own opinion. That's a perspective of being a human being. But it is as important to point out that your opinion, in which it can be called an editorial or whatever you want to call it, should never be pointed out directly in your reports. You can state it before or you can state it after, but put the data first. Even if the data is conclusive and it is against your own personal bias, you put that data first. Your own bias should never be the aspect where people make a decision. I hear too many people who points out certain information, and you can see the perspective of the bias that's leaning towards left or right, and it's becoming a true essence of an issue because you hear the perspective of the right or the perspective of the left, but you don't hear the perspective of both sides. One of the things that I learned from my grandmother, and it's something it's been a tangible for me since I was a little boy. You should never cater to one side of a view. If you want to prove that that evidence you have is this or that, then point out the evidence, then point out the perspective that you're trying to show. That's something called a hypothesis, a theory. That's the thing I hear too many times today. Everybody has a hypothesis or a theory, and they like to assert certain things. And the problem with that is that people continuously pick and choose evidence to fit their narrative. It doesn't matter if it's a perspective on the left, perspective on the right. If you want to do that, that's your choice. But when you are challenged by a perspective that is conclusive and shows that your opinion, your bias, your insight is not right, then be honest about it. That's the perspective I feel people have forgotten. They are told you're right, they're wrong. Great. Then put it forth with real evidence. I'll give you an example. I've seen so many times a certain situation where somebody says, this is okay, cool. Show me the evidence. Studying public policies, one of the things I've learned, and it's a perspective from a conservative individual. He even said it best for him. I've always believed, in his mind, he said, I always believe that people will always have a deterrent factor on any determination of assessment. But when you collide your bias, your perspective, and put it as a policy based on your bias, that can be a policy. That's not a perspective based on general policy, based on evidence. He even said it during his time in his professional career. Everybody knew what his perspective was, but people on both aisles on perspective always worked with him because he was honest enough to say, hey, wait a minute. We have this assessment. This is the evidence. We need to put it out that this evidence shows this, or this. He have said multiple times that often when people start putting their stamp of approval based on their bias, not on independent evidence, that kind of person should never be trusted. For me personally, I agreed with him, not because of what he meant. It was what he believed in, and the criteria he put forth was something that we all need to understand. We always will have determined some assessment could be biased. We all know that. But when you have backed up data that's not focused only on the left or the right, but is a perspective on both sides of the aisle, then you have to make a decision based on the evidence itself. And for me, I'll give you a great example. I always carry with me a minimum of 5 to 10 minimum independent sources. And I assess those sources and put that in my writings, in my opinion. But when I put my opinion in there, I base my opinion on the data I received and I read. But if it's an opinion based on my information, but there is a collided variance because of my own personal bias, I put it in. I always tell people, I always put my editorial, my own view on my assessments. A professional assessment is supposed to be your professional information based on evidence itself. Unless it's characterized that you can put your own opinion, I always say to people, don't do so. But if you have and you can, then put it in the end. State it as your own insightful opinion, driven by your own prerogative, your own assessment of your own choice. So the question is, why are people so scared to challenge their bias? Why they are scared to point out certain things that is true, and their unwillingness to just point it out and state the facts? Is the facts more scary than because it's the truth? To me, if you are willing to challenge the fact and you can't prove it, then you shouldn't be challenging the facts. Keep the facts as is. Don't put and change the narrative. That's something I've seen too many times in the last 2, 3 decades. People use political narratives based on their views versus based on facts. So for now, think about it yourself. How should we analyze everything? Should it be just perspective based on one side? And should it be based on one insight or two insights or evidence? To me, the best way I do it is a minimum of 5 to 10, because the true point of any insightful discussion is that it should be open to interpretation, but respect for each side, but must be driven by evidence and by data that is independent of any factor other than balanced and accountable. So for now, take care, stay safe, and enjoy whatever nice weather you guys have. Take care.